Good Shabbos again, everyone. I'm sure everyone here is familiar with the story of Anne Frank. But what you may not be familiar with is the story of a woman who made the hiding of Anne Frank and her family possible. And it was an incredible non-Jewish woman named Meep Geese. And her story was told in an incredible TV show, a series that my wife Lisa and I just finished, called A Small Light. And you can find A Small Light on Hulu or Disney, and I highly recommend it. Because it's fascinating to see the story from the perspective of Meep Geese. Meep was Otto Frank, Anne Frank's father's young, energetic, and courageous assistant. At the time of the Holocaust, when hiding Anne Frank's family, she was in her late 20s and recently married. And she's the one who's responsible every single day risking her life to bring food and news of what was happening outside to the Frank family and the others hiding in the attic of Anne Frank's father's office in Amsterdam. It's an incredible story. But what's also really interesting is not only to see the perspective of her side, but also you're reminded that she's Anne Frank's mentor in many ways. Many of us may remember reading the Diary of Anne Frank. I haven't read it since I was in middle school, but this story inspired me to read it again because I remember reading the diary, and Anne, of course, not only is dealing with hiding with her family in a small attic for 2 years, never going outside, but also with the challenges of being middle school age, about learning about the world, her relationship with her mother, and how that she has a crush on the young boy also being hid in the attic from another family, a boy named Peter. And Meep serves as a mentor for Anne, teaching her about the ins and outs of young teenage love. She explains to Anne that, yes, she may have a crush on Peter, but to be careful because she's young. And she really doesn't fully understand what love is really all about. That love is more than about romantic love. That it's not easy. That marriage, long-lasting love, takes work. And that she reminds Anne Frank throughout the show that there's something more fundamental that is important for a marriage to last. That it's not just about love. But before I tell you what that is, I need to explain to you a very bizarre ceremony found in our Torah portion today. A ceremony that's about as politically incorrect as you can get. It's so bad that this warning is necessary, that it's a ritual that was in the context of the ancient Israelite culture, and its practice, thank God, hasn't been carried out for thousands of years. And the process and its implications reflect the cultural and religious norms of that time, thousands of years ago. And thank God it's a procedure that we don't follow today. I'm talking about the Sota ceremony. It's a ceremony found in our portion today that you probably have never heard of before. We try to hide this one. But the term Sota refers to a woman who's suspected of committing adultery, but the husband lacks sufficient evidence for a conviction. You could actually be convicted at the time and sentenced to death if you committed adultery. Now, this Sota ceremony begins when a husband becomes so jealous and suspicious that his wife has been unfaithful to him, but he doesn't have witnesses or concrete evidence to support his suspicion. So for whatever reason, he's just suspicious. So the husband would actually bring his wife to the tabernacle where the priest officiate. He would also bring a grain offering, typically consisting of barley flour. The priest would take holy water in an earthenware vessel and add some dust from the floor of the tabernacle. Then he would write a curse on a scroll, dissolve the ink in the water, and prepare what was called bitter water. The priest would then place the accused woman before God, uncover her hair, and have her hold the grain offering while standing before the altar. The priest would then administer an oath to the woman, stating the consequences if she had been unfaithful. The priest would then write the curse on a scroll containing the oath, dissolve the writing in the bitter water, and give it to the woman to drink. Can you imagine if I did that here today? It was terrible. But the woman would drink the bitter water, and if she was innocent, it was believed the water would have no harmful effects on her. However, if she had been unfaithful, the water was believed to bring a curse upon her, causing physical and reproductive harm. Because after the woman drank the water, the priest would take the grain offering from her hands and present it to God. And then he would pray for divine intervention. If the woman was guilty, her stomach would swell and her thigh would rupture, becoming a public sign of her guilt. And the final step involving determining the woman's guilt or innocence was based on any physical effects that manifest after drinking the bitter water. If no harm came to her, she was declared innocent, and her husband would have to accept her back. But if she experienced a rupture of her thigh and her stomach, she was considered guilty of adultery. Now, as awful and terrible as this procedure was for women, Rabbi Harold Kushner, Zichrono Livracha, does explain something very interesting. He explains that the process created a situation where it was very unlikely a guilty verdict would be rendered. 99% of the time, there would be no harmful effects on the woman. And Rabbi Kushner makes the point that the purpose of this ceremony may well have been to alleviate a husband's suspicion and actually restore domestic harmony. Because the rabbis understood this ordeal, this terrible ordeal of the sota, less as a way of discovering a woman who committed adultery, and more as a way of proving to the husband that his suspicions were groundless. Because a husband may not be satisfied with friends telling him, stop it, you're fine, or with the court's not guilty. But if he had God's judgment, perhaps he would then be less suspicious. And we could understand the promise that if a woman is found innocent, she could be restored to a life of love with her husband. But Rabbi Kushner then asks us something extremely important. He says, even if the ordeal turned a husband's heart back to his wife, what will it take to restore her trust in him? Because without trust, how long can the relationship last? My friends, without trust, how long can any relationship last? And this is Meep's point to the young and idealistic Anne Frank. Yes, Anne's having a hard time Meep, at the time when she's mentoring Anne Frank, is having a hard time trusting her own husband, Jan. He's constantly away, frequently disappearing. She thinks he's having an affair. But as the show points out, she doesn't realize that her husband is actually fighting with the Dutch resistance in secret against the Germans. And her lack of trust in her husband is destroying her marriage. Because trust ultimately is what it's all about. I'll never forget years ago, right before I got married, I was flying home from California from rabbinical school, and I happened to sit next to an older couple on a plane. This particular couple had been married for over 60 years. And we got into a conversation, and I told them I was about to get married. And they gave me advice that I've always kept with me. And I think some ways has helped my own marriage. It was very unusual advice, but they said, Brian, these 3 things have kept our marriage alive for 60 years. They said, Brian, 3 things. Go to bed at the same time, get up at the same time, and don't ever give your spouse a reason not to trust you. I can't tell you I've kept number 1 and 2, but I've always tried not to give my wife Lisa a reason not to trust me. I'll never forget that chance encounter. And there's no doubt the best marriages I have seen as a rabbi have been ones here in our congregation between spouses that trust each other, that they have no doubt what's best for each other, that they never make their spouse suspicious of what they may be doing. My parents recently celebrated their 52nd anniversary. And I can't tell you they have a perfect marriage. No one does. But they have a wonderful marriage. And I think one of the reasons why is because trust is the basis of their marriage. Trust has always been considered a fundamental pillar of a healthy and lasting relationship in the Jewish tradition. And it's also backed up by numerous modern-day studies and surveys that always highlight the need and the significance of trust in marital satisfaction and overall relationship well-being. Trust forms that foundation that we all need of a strong emotional bond between partners, fostering open communication, intimacy, and mutual support. Trust creates that safe environment where couples can openly express their thoughts, their feelings, and their concerns without fear of judgment or betrayal. Trust enables partners to be vulnerable with one another, fostering that emotional closeness and deeper connection that we all need. And studies consistently find a positive association between trust and overall relationship satisfaction. When partners trust each other, they're more likely to experience higher levels of happiness and contentment. Trust allows spouses to fully rely on each other, knowing that they have a partner who will always have their back. Yes, the lyrics teach love is all you need. But in my experience, love is not all you need. Because the Jewish tradition has always been less concerned about the wedding day than it is with the marriage. Less concerned with passionate love than it is with responsible love. The Jewish marriage process, including the Afraf, the Ketubah, Kiddushin under the Chuppah, are all rituals performed to emphasize the importance of building trust. In fact, the Hebrew word for trust, batach, not only signifies trust, but signifies that sense of security, assurance, and the belief that one can depend on another human being fully, without suspicion. It's a beautiful way to live. But my friends, trust is not just a one-time accomplishment, but a continuing process that requires cultivation. It requires that consistent effort, communication, and a demonstration of loyalty. I know too many couples who maintained a healthy marriage for years or even decades, but one act of dishonesty ruined it all. That's all it takes. One bad decision, one act of suspicion, one act of disloyalty can ruin all the years that we may work for to build a healthy relationship. You may have seen that recently the United States surpassed a major milestone. For the first time in American history, there are more unmarried American adults than married adults. It's unprecedented. For the first time, those over 18 in our country, you're more likely to be unmarried than married. That's never happened before. Decades ago, certainly last century in the 1800s, 80-90% of Americans were married. Now it's less than 50%. And there are many reasons for this. But is one additional reason the fact that young people have a hard time trusting others? You almost can't blame them. Between social media and cable news, we're taught again and again not to trust our own fellow Americans. Even people that may have political differences, we're taught again and again that they can never be trusted with taking over our country. God forbid. And we're taught again and again not to trust everyday simple Americans that you and I may encounter. Our young people are growing up in a world where they're taught and emphasized, unfortunately, not to trust other human beings. So perhaps the best we can do for our precious young is to set an example for them. For those of us who are blessed to be married, can we set an example for our young people the importance of trust, that marriage is worth the risk. It's worth the risk of getting married, that they can trust someone for the rest of their lives. In our Jewish tradition, the concept of truth, or emes, in Hebrew holds great significance. It's considered by the rabbis one of the reasons why our world stands. And our tradition places a strong emphasis on the pursuit of emes, on truth, as a moral and ethical value above all else. It's the value of personal integrity is paramount. In the pursuit of truth is seen as essential for personal growth, spiritual connection, and fostering those harmonious relationships, especially with our spouses.